The taxi pulled up to the address Thomas had sent. It was a townhouse, part of a row of similar-looking buildings here in Willow Creek. It looked lived in, maybe a little tired around the edges, but my heart felt full, buzzing with a quiet hope, ready to step back into their lives. I carried my suitcase up the short walk from the street, the air feeling dry and carrying that subtle scent of a place that isn't home yet, that unmistakable unfamiliarity. But the first step onto the sidewalk felt colder than I expected. Thomas hadn't been able to pick me up himself. He'd said a last-minute video meeting had come up, simply texted me the address and the code for the front door. I pressed the doorbell anyway, a habit, I guess, wanting that moment of the door opening, of seeing his face. A few minutes later, Christine opened the door. Her smile was perfectly polite. "Hi, Eleanor. Was the trip okay?" she asked, her voice a little rushed. Before I could really answer, before I could step fully inside and feel the warmth of a real welcome, she was already turning away, glancing back into the house. "Leo's still finishing up his online class," she added quickly. "He'll come say hi in a bit. Come in." I stepped inside. The house wasn't small, not at all, but it felt cluttered, lived in a way that suggested haste rather than comfort. Leo's toys were scattered near the couch. Breakfast dishes were still sitting on the dining table. The air smelled faintly of something sharp, like old cheese, mixed with the sweet, familiar scent of baby shampoo. "Your room's this way," Christine said, pointing toward a door I hadn't noticed at first. It led downstairs. "We cleared out the storage room in the basement a little," she explained as I started down the steep staircase. "You might have to make do for a few days. It's not much." The steps creaked under my weight. It was a dimly lit, half-underground space. When I reached the bottom, I saw it, the basement. It did have a bed, a narrow twin bed pushed up against the wall next to an old desk. The walls looked stained with moisture in places, and a few cardboard boxes sat untouched in the corners, like forgotten sentinels. I walked over to the bed, set my bag down, and carefully sat on the edge. As I did, a dull ache sparked in my ankle, an old problem flaring up whenever it got damp. I looked around the small space, the stained walls, the narrow bed, and a quiet question settled in my chest. Was this home now, or just a place to stay? I tried to tell myself they were just busy, just stressed, that things would get better once we settled into a routine. I hoped things would feel better, but the routine that followed, it only solidified a different, colder truth. The days blurred together in Willow Creek, each one feeling much like the last. Mornings began quietly in the basement, the dampness a dull ache in my ankle. I'd make my way upstairs when I heard movement, usually just in time to see Christine rushing out the door. "Morning, Eleanor," she'd call out, already gripping her coffee and scanning her phone. "There's toast in the fridge, Leo's in the living room, running late, let's catch up tonight." She never waited for a reply. She was simply out the door, a blur of efficiency focused elsewhere. In those moments, I felt less like family, less like a guest, and more like a tenant, someone just temporarily occupying a space until the real residents were ready to use it again. I spent hours in the kitchen, trying to find some familiarity in the disarray, or sitting by the tiny window, watching the limited view of the window well outside. It was unnervingly quiet upstairs once Christine left and Thomas was at work, broken only by the muted sounds of Leo's video games or online classes. No one called down to me. I'd lost count of how many times I'd closed my eyes, only to open them to no one calling me to dinner. No Leo racing down the stairs asking for a story like he used to. George's watch on my wrist ticked steadily, an unchanging reminder of a past that felt increasingly distant. One evening, Leo came downstairs while I was sitting on the edge of my bed. He paused at the landing, still wearing his dinosaur hoodie, and eyed me for a second before scrunching up his nose. "When are you leaving this time?" he asked, his voice direct, almost blunt. I blinked, caught off guard. I was about to find a gentle way to answer when Christine's voice floated down from upstairs. "Leo, we don't talk like that," he muttered under his breath. "But Dad said she's just staying for a bit." It hurt, a quiet, sharp sting. Did I raise him to only see what I could provide, or to simply echo the casual indifference he heard around him, Later, out of nowhere, while Leo was playing his game and I was trying to find a place to sit that didn't feel like I was in the way, he called out, "Grandma, my game console's busted. Can you buy me the new one? Mason has it at school." "I want it too," I replied softly. "Maybe next weekend. We can go to the store together and take a look." He just pouted, not looking up. "The one you got me last time is already old. I don't even bring it to school anymore." He seemed to expect it. Just another transaction. "Didn't you say you moved here to spend time with me?" he'd asked earlier, just a few days into my visit. Spend time. Did that mean I was supposed to say yes to everything he asked for? Just another service provider. Dinner was usually a quiet affair. Thomas would arrive home, tired, give a brief nod, and the three of us would gather around the table. Mary Christine would be on her phone, managing work emails. Leo would scroll through his tablet between bites. Thomas would often have a stack of bills nearby, tapping his fingers nervously. It was during one of these silent dinners, where I sat slightly apart, waiting for them to start eating the food I'd prepared, a simple chicken and vegetables, that Thomas finally spoke, seemingly out of the blue. He cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, not quite looking up from his bills, "the house situation's been tight. Rent, utilities, Leo's education fund. It's all a lot right now." There was no introduction, no context, just that, like I was supposed to know where this was going. I set down my fork, my hand freezing. He didn't say anything more, maybe sensing the sudden tension. I barely touched my food after that. The vegetables felt overcooked, the chicken dry. It all tasted like paper. I wiped my mouth gently with a napkin and began clearing the dishes. No one stopped me. No one offered to help. I tried to be helpful, to cook, to assist Leo with homework when Christine asked me to, but every gesture felt like it hit an invisible wall. Until one evening, the wall didn't just feel cold. It felt calculated. I tried to be helpful. I really did. After George, Walter, passed, and Thomas seemed so distant, I desperately wanted to feel useful again, to be a part of their lives in Willow Creek. I tried cooking dinner, something simple but comforting, like Walter's favorite braised chicken with roasted potatoes. Their kitchen wasn't like mine back in Maplewood Heights. It was cramped. The spices were cluttered and mismatched, but I found what I needed bit by bit, all while trying to coax Leo to finish his homework. Halfway through, he just groaned, flopping back against the chair. "Grandma, I don't want to do this. It's due tomorrow. Just write it for me." I smiled, trying to keep my patience. "Why don't you tell me what you want to say? I can help you draft it." He slammed his pencil down. "You're so annoying, just write it. Just do it." I froze for a second, startled by the sharpness in his voice, so unlike the sweet boy who used to beg for stories. Before I could say anything, he stormed off to his room, the door slamming shut behind him. His notebook lay open, a few messy words scrawled across the page. He had tried, at least. When dinner was ready that night, Christine stepped into the kitchen and frowned slightly. "Eleanor," she said, her voice calm but clipped, "I appreciate the cooking, but we're trying to get Leo to handle his own assignments. You really don't need to give in to every little thing he asks for." I looked up. "I wasn't doing it for him. She cut in, still polite, but with boundaries as clear as glass. "I know you meant well. We're trying to set some limits." I just nodded, saying nothing. Leo was already used to getting his way too easily, she seemed to imply. During the 2 weeks I'd been staying at Pebblebrook Lane, I kept telling myself that if I just did a little more, waited a little longer, they would eventually let me in. It was the same feeling I had when Christine had just given birth to Leo. Thomas was overwhelmed back then, emotional, barely holding it together. But even then, in the quiet of the night, he'd still call and ask, "Mom, why won't Leo stop crying?" I would talk him through it, how to hold him, how to gently pat his back. Sometimes he wouldn't say anything at all, just needed to hear a familiar voice. I thought maybe this time, too. They just needed time to adjust to a new arrangement, to me being there. My ankle had been aching more than usual the last few days, a familiar throb thanks to the damp basement triggering my old gout. I needed my medication, which I'd left on the nightstand downstairs. One evening, I went upstairs to fetch it, a small, mundane errand. The house was quiet, only the faint sound of Leo's game coming from upstairs. I walked towards the kitchen, where I thought I'd left my pill organizer. But what I heard from the kitchen wasn't small at all. Thomas was talking to Christine, their voices low at first, then clearer as I got closer. I froze at the foot of the stairs. Something in me told me not to move, just to listen. "She's going to have to give us something eventually," I heard Thomas say. "Otherwise, we'll never be able to buy that house," Christine replied, her voice too soft for me to make out the exact words, but I could hear the agreement in her tone. Thomas spoke again, more sharply this time. "We never meant for her to stay that long anyway. The whole point of having her come was to feel things out, see how much money she might be sitting on. And now she's gone, and we've got no excuse to ask." I stood there, cold, the words settling into my bones like a winter draft. My heart hammered against my ribs. So that's what it was. I hadn't been invited to reconnect. I hadn't been asked to help out. Not really. I hadn't been invited to be part of anything. I was a financial strategy, a talking point in a long-term plan. They brought me here not out of love, but as a lever, a means to an end. It wasn't about family, it was about money. My hands tightened their grip on nothing. All those years, every sacrifice, every late-night phone call, every letter, every time I put their needs above my own. Was it always like this? Did they ever see me, or just what I could provide? Did they ever see me as anything more than a resource? In that moment, standing in the dim light of the hallway, something shifted inside me. The sadness and the sting of betrayal were still there, a deep wound. But beneath it, a spark ignited, a spark of anger, yes, hot and searing. But also of clarity, and a fierce, unshakable resolve. I would reclaim what had been taken, not just my dignity, but my own sense of worth, and maybe, just maybe, a house too. I didn't wait for another word. I didn't grab my misplaced medication just then. I just turned, walked back downstairs, and quietly packed the suitcase I hadn't fully unpacked in the first place. It felt fitting that the zipper stuck a little. Even leaving wasn't perfectly smooth. I gently wrapped the now nearly dried rose I'd brought from Maplewood Heights and placed it carefully on top of my clothes. Thomas and Christine were somewhere upstairs, lost in their routines, unaware or perhaps simply uncaring that I was leaving. I didn't interrupt them. I just pulled the front door open gently. The sunlight outside felt cold, like brushed metal. As I stepped out, I reached into my pocket, took out the house key they had given me, and placed it behind the little flower pot by the door, the same spot where they usually kept the spare. I had no plans to take anything of theirs with me, not their belongings, not their expectations, only the rose I had brought, the last bloom from my old life. I stood there on the walk, taking a deep breath of the unfamiliar air of Willow Creek. My fingers fumbled with my phone, scrolling through contacts until I landed on Susan, my sister. The call barely rang twice before she picked up. "Hello," she said, her voice low but immediately alert. "Eleanor, what's going on?" I hesitated, my voice barely a whisper. "Sis, I need to get out of here." There was a brief pause on the other end, maybe Susan imagining what the past couple of weeks must have been like for me. Then her voice came through, warm and steady, a lifeline. "Come right now. I'll come get you. Don't explain too much, and don't feel like you're wrong for leaving." Just hearing her say that, hearing the absolute certainty in her voice, the complete lack of judgment or demand, loosened something tight in my chest. Susan's old gray SUV pulled slowly into the driveway on Pebblebrook Lane a little while later. The small front yard looked just roughly trimmed by the property management company. I stood there waiting in the breeze, my coat pulled tight, feeling exposed and vulnerable. As soon as she stepped out, Susan opened her arms wide. "I'm here. Sis, don't say a word. Just get in the car." I didn't smile. I don't think I could. I just nodded and walked towards her. That sting behind my eyes hadn't fully faded, but I knew more than ever how much I needed that embrace. She tucked my suitcase into the trunk without fuss. We didn't say much as we drove. Susan turned on the car stereo, let it play some oldies on the radio, and hummed quietly to herself. It felt like she was mending something in me, gently waiting for me to be ready to speak. We drove from the outskirts of Willow Creek, through the city center. Then out toward an older residential area on the east side of Fairview. Susan lived in a renovated duplex on Lilac Court. It had a small front yard filled with poppies and rosemary, a cheerful little garden. A wind chime hung near the porch, tinkling with every breeze, a gentle, welcoming sound. "We're home," she said, rolling down the window as we pulled into the driveway. "Tell me this doesn't feel warmer than your son's place." I gave a small nod and managed a faint smile. It already did. This is what family should feel like. Not a negotiation, but a harbor. Her home was different the moment you stepped inside. It opened into a bright, open kitchen that flowed into the dining area. A basket of fresh bananas and walnuts sat on the table, looking vibrant and welcoming, alongside a few birthday cards. The walls were covered in framed photographs, Thanksgiving dinners, backyard barbecues, road trips, Susan in aprons, Susan holding luggage, Susan laughing with her children. Her life had presence, continuity, people who cared. "I have the guest room ready," she said, leading me through the cheerful space. "This one gets the best light. Morning sun hits the bed right through the window." She opened the curtain, and indeed, sunlight streamed in, warm and inviting. With Susan, the days unfolded like a quiet stream, steady and warm. In the gentle rhythm of her life, I began to find my own footing, piece by piece. And then, an unexpected opportunity arose, connecting me back to the very place I had just escaped, in the calm of Lilac Court, surrounded by Susan's cheerful poppies and fragrant rosemary. I started to breathe again. The air was dry here, not damp and heavy like the basement. My ankle still ached sometimes, but it wasn't the constant dull throb it had been. Slowly, gently, the tension in my shoulders began to ease. I unpacked my suitcase and gently took out the rose I'd brought. It had wilted a bit, but it still held its shape. I found a small glass, filled it with water, and placed the rose in it on the desk in the guest room. "You still came with me," I whispered to it. Susan never pressed me about what happened at Pebblebrook Lane. She didn't ask if Thomas or Christine had called. They hadn't. She simply made space for me, in her home and in her life. We fell into a quiet routine. Mornings. Susan would often go to the Fairview Senior and Community Hub for volunteer work. Sometimes I'd go with her, just to get out of the house. She'd been urging me to get involved for weeks. "Eleanor, you should come to the craft group. You make felt animals 10 times better than the social workers," she teased. One bright Friday morning, I finally went, bringing a few old projects and a box of tools. I only meant to sit in the back and watch, to be a quiet observer. But the moment I arrived, one of the coordinators, a kind woman with a spark in her eye named Betty, gently nudged me forward. "We're short on someone to lead today's craft group," she said. "Want to give it a try?" I smiled and shook my head immediately. "Oh, I couldn't. I'm not a professional." Betty just laughed. "You don't have to be, Eleanor. You just have to be willing to share." And just like that, I found myself standing at the front of the room, leading a group of about 10 older women in decorating picture frames with personal mementos. They sat around the table, some hard of hearing, some with trembling hands, but every single one of them smiled with real joy as they glued beads and ribbons onto their frames. "Were you a teacher, dear?" one woman, Clara, in a pink sweater, asked me. I smiled. "No," I said. "I was just someone who got forgotten when she wasn't useful anymore." Clara paused for a moment, looking at me with gentle eyes, then reached over and held my hand. "Well," she said softly, her grip surprisingly firm. "You're needed now. Thank you." In that moment, something warm and unfamiliar stirred in my chest. Maybe being needed isn't the same as being used. Maybe it's about finding the right place. From then on, I taught the craft group weekly. Our little group grew, not just crafts anymore, but small sharing circles. Someone even suggested, "Eleanor, why don't you give a talk sometime? Something like the second half of life. You've got a story. We all need to learn how you got back up." I laughed at the idea, thinking it was just a passing comment, but someone had already written it into next month's schedule. Back at Lilac Court, I started spending time in Susan's small garden, helping her with the herbs. and I'd check on the rose in my room. Each morning, I'd look at it, a little more alive than it had been the day before, its edges curling inward slightly but still holding its color. I missed the smell of fresh bread baking, sunlight spilling across a porch swing, a kitchen humming with warmth. I missed feeling like home. But here, I was starting to find a different kind of home, not a physical structure, but a feeling within myself. I realized I had skills, passions I'd set aside for years, while focusing entirely on Walter, then on Thomas and Leo. Baking, crafting, reading. I started doing these things again, just for myself. Susan never asked about money, never hinted at expectations. She just offered quiet support. I was starting to feel useful again, not because someone demanded it, but because I chose to be, because I was finally allowing myself to be. As I found my footing in Fairview, the house back in Willow Creek felt like a distant memory, a place I had passed through. But fate, or perhaps just simple timing, wasn't done with that chapter yet. A few days later, a new piece of information changed everything once more: my gout medication. It had been a few days, and the ache had started creeping back, a dull, insistent pain in my ankle. I suddenly realized I'd left my old pill organizer on the nightstand in the basement at Pebblebrook Lane. A simple oversight, easily fixed. But going back, even for a moment, revealed the final, unexpected piece of the puzzle. Susan offered to go with me, her protective instinct immediate, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, didn't want to turn it into an event. "It's just a quick trip, sis," I said. "I'll call a car." So, while Susan was out running errands for the senior hub, I called a taxi and went alone. As the car pulled up to the address on Pebblebrook Lane, my stomach tightened slightly. The townhouse looked exactly the same as when I'd left it, just a few days prior. The lawn was still unkempt, the trash bins were tipped over near the curb, and the house number hung crookedly on the wall. It looked uncared for. I entered the passcode Thomas had given me and eased the door open quietly. "Hello?" I called out softly. But there was no answer from the main floor. From upstairs, I could hear the familiar blaring of Leo's video game, probably deep in some afternoon tournament. No one was around downstairs. I headed straight for the basement. Everything was just as I'd left it. The bedding still rumpled on the narrow twin bed, the air still slightly musty. My pill organizer sat untouched on the nightstand, just where I'd left it, as if no one had even noticed I'd been gone, or noticed that I hadn't returned for it. I picked it up, the plastic cool in my hand, ready to turn around and leave immediately. But something stopped me, an impulse, a feeling I couldn't explain. I walked over to the small, half-sized basement window, the one coated in dust that never let in much light. I looked out, seeing only the ground level of the street outside. And then, I don't know why, I checked my phone. I barely ever used it except to call Susan or occasionally check emails. As I scrolled, a small notification caught my eye. It was from a local real estate platform Susan had mentioned, something about quiet listings. And there it was, the address, Pebblebrook Lane. My heart leaped. The townhouse was listed, quietly, on a private platform. Suddenly, the neglected lawn, the tipped bins, the hurried atmosphere, it all clicked into place. They were preparing to leave. They needed the money from a sale, probably for that down payment Thomas was so stressed about. I didn't hesitate. I walked back upstairs, out the front door, and back into the waiting taxi. The ride back to Fairview felt different. The air wasn't just unfamiliar anymore. It felt charged with possibility. The moment I got back to Lilac Court, I called the real estate agent whose name was on the listing, Ms. Chen. Her voice was sharp, efficient. "Yes, the townhouse on Pebblebrook Lane. It's a private listing. The owners are an older couple looking to retire to Florida, eager to sell. I'm interested," I said, my voice steady, calm. "Are you able to make a cash offer?" she asked. "Someone else has shown interest, but their mortgage approval is still pending." "I'll pay in cash," I said. Even I was surprised by how certain I sounded. There was no hesitation, no pause. Ms. Chen's voice softened slightly. "In that case, you'll have priority. Paying in cash, The words echoed in my mind long after I hung up. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about dignity. It was about taking back control. They saw me as a bank account, a resource to be tapped for their plans. But I was so much more. I had worked my whole life, saved, managed. I had built something of my own, and I would show them. I wasn't just a discarded piece of their future. I was the architect of my own. A few days later, the call came that sealed the deal. The paperwork was complete. The house on Pebblebrook Lane was mine. The day of the property inspection arrived. It was a Saturday. The agent, Ms. Chen, had informed Thomas and Christine that a buyer would be present for the preliminary walkthrough, but she hadn't told them who. That was exactly how I wanted it. No drama, no pretense, just the truth revealed when it needed to be. Susan insisted on coming along. "I'm not letting you face that man alone," she said, her voice firm. I smiled. This time, I wasn't walking in with my head down. We waited just outside the neighborhood gate until Ms. Chen arrived. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman with efficient movements and a neutral, professional tone. "The tenants are home," she said crisply. "I'll step in first and let them know we're here." I stood there with Susan, looking at that familiar door on Pebblebrook Lane. For a moment, I pictured Leo standing there, asking for a new game console. Back then, I thought he was just being childish. Now I knew better. His parents had taught him early how to ask upward, how to see people for what they could provide. A few minutes later, Ms. Chen waved us in. I straightened my shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped into the house I once knew, down to its smallest creak and scent. Christine was sitting on the couch in the living room, flipping through a magazine. Thomas leaned in the kitchen doorway, his arms crossed, his expression wary. When they saw me, their eyes widened, both froze, caught completely off guard. "Mom," Thomas said, his voice full of disbelief. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer him directly. I walked straight into the center of the living room and turned to Ms. Chen. "I'd like to check the basement first," I said evenly, my voice calm. I wasn't satisfied with the ventilation last time. Christine stood up, her eyes wide. "Wait, buyer. What do you mean, buyer?" Thomas turned slowly toward me, his face pale, his voice suddenly quieter, strained. "You're the buyer." Only then did I meet his eyes. I looked at him, calm as if I were pouring a cup of tea. "Yes, Thomas, the house belongs to me now." Christine went pale. Thomas blinked, stunned. Why would you?" "That day I came to get my medication," I said, cutting him off, my voice steady. "I heard you and Christine in the kitchen." He froze, the blood draining from his face. "You were eavesdropping on us." "It wasn't eavesdropping," I said, and gave a soft, humorless smile. "I was standing right there. You just didn't care if I heard you or not." The room went still. Only Leo's video game echoed faintly from upstairs, like it was coming from another universe entirely, completely detached from the tense reality below. Thomas opened his mouth, maybe to argue, but no words came out. Christine was the one to speak, her voice tight with something that might have been confusion, or maybe just annoyance at the disrupted plan. "Eleanor, if you were planning to buy the house all along, why—" "I wasn't," I said, my voice still steady. "I had no plans to buy this house. In fact," I looked between them, my gaze unwavering. "I was thinking of helping you. After selling my house in Maplewood Heights, I had some savings, and I was considering offering part of it to help with a down payment. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could support you two in building some stability here. I thought that's what family did. Help each other." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But then I heard what you said, and in that moment, I understood. You didn't invite me here because you missed me. You didn't want help. You wanted a transaction. You wanted to see how much I had so you could take it. My voice didn't rise, but it held a weight of quiet finality. "I don't owe you anything, not 1 cent. Thomas stepped forward, his eyes sharp with emotion. "So, this was what you wanted to humiliate us." "I didn't touch a penny of your money, Thomas," I said firmly. "You treated me like I was standing in the way of your future. But you didn't realize I was the one being used, calculated, exploited. Susan stepped forward, her presence powerful. Now you remember she's your mother, Thomas, she said, her voice sharp, almost cutting. Thomas turned toward her, startled. She raised you alone for years. You needed money for summer camp in elementary school. She cleaned 3 houses a day just to get by. When you applied to college, who co-signed your loan, who bought you your first second-hand laptop. You moved to another city for work. Who paid your rent for 3 months when you were too broke to eat. Who mailed you cash and comfort food. Susan's voice rose slightly, the force of years of unspoken frustration finally unleashed. And when did she ever ask for anything in return? You didn't just fail her. Thomas, you used her. You said once she left, you wouldn't have a reason to ask her for money anymore. That's not neglect. That's disgrace. You don't deserve to call yourself her son. The room went silent again. Thomas's face had gone gray. He opened his mouth, maybe to defend himself, but no words came out. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, about saying no more. The next 10 minutes were a blur of process. Ms. Chen moved efficiently through the formalities, signatures, photos, documents. The final walkthrough was done. Confirmation done. Thomas and Christine stood stiff in the living room, like 2 people caught in a downpour, unsure whether their silence came from shock, shame, or just plain disbelief. Before I stepped outside, I turned back to them. "I'm not reclaiming the house immediately," I said. "The lease gives you 1 more month. I'll return then. No need to panic." I paused, letting my gaze rest on Thomas for a moment. "Just remember this place now belongs to someone else." I didn't wait to see their reaction. The door closed softly behind me, and for the first time in years, I knew I had finally erased my name from their family roster of usefulness and stepped fully into a life of my own. Susan's home on Lilac Court was always quiet, like the kind of place where no one needed to speak much to be fully understood. The poppies on her windowsill bloomed again and again, and the kitchen still held the soft, comforting scent of last night's dinner. I settled into a rhythm, mending the loose seam of my old scarf in the living room, while the radio played songs from another time. I thought today would be another peaceful day like that. Then the doorbell rang. Susan peeked out from the kitchen. "Did you order something?" she asked. I shook my head and set down my sewing kit. She went to open the door. I heard her gasp softly. Then a voice I knew too well. "Hi, Aunt Susan. Is my mom home?" It was Thomas. I stood up. There was no rush of emotion, no flicker of hope, just a chill spreading quietly through my chest, like water left out too long, gone cold. Susan looked over at me, a silent question in her eyes. I gave her a nod before she stepped aside and let him in. Thomas glanced around the bright, open space as he entered. The moment his eyes landed on me, standing there near the couch, he shifted his expression into a careful, conciliatory smile. "Mom," he said, lowering himself into the chair across from me. I wanted to talk about everything." He set a gift bag on the coffee table between us. "It's the tea biscuits Walter used to love. I went to that old shop you liked in Maplewood Heights." I didn't reach for them, didn't say a word. He cleared his throat and leaned forward. That way people do when they want to seem open. Earnest. "I know I said some things that didn't come out right," he began. "Maybe made you feel you weren't welcome. But honestly, we've been grateful. Grateful you came to help us. Truly." So, I said nothing. "So," he went on, shifting slightly, "I realized this whole house thing. It might have been a heat-of-the-moment choice for you, buying it. But I was thinking maybe if we can work something out. Keep it in the family. I mean, Leo grew up there. It's his home, too. You want me to sign it over to you?" I cut in, my voice quiet but steady. "Well, maybe start with a letter of intent, something informal. We'd stay on, keep the place stable for Leo. So, this is why you came," I said softly. "No, Mom, I came to talk." "You didn't come to talk," I said, my voice clear. "You came to ask." He froze. I leaned back against the couch, my voice still calm. I understand wanting to build your life, wanting to give maximum stability for your family. What I don't understand is dressing up your financial needs in the name of family and using that to ask for my life savings. After I heard you and Christine in the kitchen, his face flushed. You didn't touch a penny of your money, he said, his voice cracking. You treated me like I was standing in the way of your future, but you didn't realize I was the one being used, calculated, exploited. Susan, who had stayed quiet until then, stood up. Her voice was sharp, almost cutting. Now you remember she's your mother, Thomas. Thomas turned toward her, startled. Susan didn't yell, but her words were like sharp stones, precise and undeniable. She reminded him of everything raising him alone, cleaning houses, co-signing his college loan after Walter died, buying his first laptop, sending him money when he was broke after moving for work. And when, she finished, her voice resonating with quiet power, did she ever ask for anything in return? I wanted to tell her to stop, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because my throat was tight with emotion. I couldn't speak. Susan took a step closer, placing herself between us, not aggressively, but as a clear boundary. You didn't just fail her, Thomas. You used her. You said once she left, you wouldn't have a reason to ask her for money anymore. That's not neglect. That's disgrace. You don't deserve to call yourself her son. The room went still again. Thomas opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at me, his face pale and etched with something that might have been shame, or just defeat. I stood up. I reached out and gently pushed the gift bag back across the coffee table. Take it, I said. I don't need it. His fingers curled around the bag's handles. I thought maybe there was still a chance, he murmured. You've thought too much, Thomas, I replied softly. He walked to the door. Each step seemed heavier than the last. He was slower than I remembered him ever walking before. When the door closed behind him, Susan came over and gently touched my shoulder. I stared at the door for a moment, and something inside me clicked. The old me had always waited for him to turn around, to say he missed me, needed me, wanted me back. But now I just wanted him to walk away for good. It wasn't about revenge, it was about boundaries, about saying no more. And so, our story shifted. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real, honest. We weren't mother and son bound by expectation and history anymore. We were two people learning to navigate a new path, with respect as the hesitant guide. Back at my place on Pebblebrook Lane, I made a final gesture, a small, quiet welcome. Sunlight bright to the point of being unreasonable poured over the porch one Saturday morning. I had just finished pulling weeds in the small patch of garden I'd started at Pebblebrook Lane, and was rinsing my hands at the outdoor tap when the doorbell rang. It wasn't Susan. She usually just walked in. I opened the door, wiping my hands on my apron. He stood there, Thomas, no suit, no hurried phone call, dressed casually, looking younger, like a version of himself I hadn't seen since he was fresh out of college. He had that slightly awkward, hopeful way he used to stand when he came to the door and called out, "Mom," back then. "Do you have a little time?" he asked, his gaze hesitant. "I was wondering if I could take you out for coffee." I dried my hands and nodded. "All right, Thomas." We went to a small cafe near the corner, not the one I usually went to with Susan, but one he seemed to have picked. I didn't mind. Sometimes a new place helps you say old things better. We sat for a while in silence, the quiet between us different from the silence at Pebblebrook Lane. This felt heavy, uncertain. He flipped through the menu, avoiding my eyes, and finally ordered a latte. "You still drink black tea?" he asked, a small, awkward attempt at conversation. I nodded. When my tea came, I cupped the warm mug in both hands, tracing the rim with my thumb, waiting. "Mom," he said finally, his voice low. He looked up then, meeting my eyes. They were steady this time, not darting away. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about everything." He paused, searching for the words. "You were always there for me." He gave a small, sheepish laugh. "Back in college, I'd get your letters every month. You remembered every exam, every name of my friends. At the time, I thought it was annoying, too much." He sighed. "But then I graduated, started work, got married, became a dad, and even though I needed your advice more than ever, I stopped even looking at you. It hit me then, the simple, crushing weight of it. It wasn't just that he took me for granted. He simply stopped seeing me. It hit me when you left, he continued, his voice quiet, that everything you did wasn't because you had to. It was because you loved me. I stirred my tea gently, my voice barely more than a whisper when I finally spoke. I didn't stop caring about you, Thomas. I just started trying to care about me too. He blinked. So, he said, leaning forward slightly. I looked at him. You're not the first to think a mother's love is a given. You won't be the last. But I can't keep being the kind of mother who only gives and is never seen. He nodded slowly. There was something heavy behind his eyes now. Understanding, maybe, or regret. Can I take my time? He asked. Not to undo everything. I know I can't. But to let you know I'm trying. To be better. For you. For me. For Leo. I don't want him to grow up and forget to be grateful, I replied quietly, setting my teacup down. I won't stop you from becoming better, Thomas. That's your journey now. But remember, respect isn't something you say, something you do. You want my help. Start by helping me. You want Leo to grow up with empathy? Then it starts with you. He exhaled long and slow, like something had finally landed. We talked for nearly an hour after that. Not arguments, not tears, just years of unspoken things laid out gently and let go one by one. When we walked out, the sunlight fell across his shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him not just as the boy I once carried forward, but as a man who might now carry himself. He would stumble again, surely. He might still say the wrong thing, but I was no longer holding the weight of being responsible for everything he did. Some doors need to close, not because there's no love, but because you finally know which home is truly yours. And so, our story shifted. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real, honest. We weren't mother and son bound by expectation and history anymore. We were two people learning to navigate a new path, with respect as the hesitant guide. Back at my place on Pebblebrook Lane, I made a final gesture, a small, quiet welcome. My house, my rules, my peace. The house on Pebblebrook Lane was finally quiet. Thomas and Christine had moved out a few weeks after my visit, just before their extended lease was up. Thomas didn't tell me the exact date, just had Ms. Chen send a formal confirmation that they had vacated. I didn't go to see them go. By the time I stepped back into the house, the weather had already turned warm. The grass in the yard had grown tall. The house itself felt quiet, like a dream that had just barely let go of sleep. The scent had changed. Gone were Leo's shampoo, Christine's perfume, the faint smell of old cheese. In their place, dust, wood, and the kind of stillness that belongs to no one, waiting. I walked through each room, remembering the first day I came, the awkward glances, the hollow small talk, the cold air in the basement. But it didn't feel like home then. Now, it could. I hired a cleaning crew, replaced the flooring, repainted the living room from that dark, heavy color to a warm, creamy beige. The curtains were cotton linen, just the way I liked. The worn leather sofa was replaced with a soft sky blue one I found at a second-hand shop in Fairview. I only changed one thing in the kitchen from before, the bottle of olive oil I'd brought with me from Maplewood Heights. It was still there, tucked away. I cleaned it and placed it right by the stove, right where it belonged. The basement, the place where I had felt so small and unwanted, was no longer a bedroom. I transformed it into a cozy workshop and storage room. My fabrics, my paper crafts, my photo boxes all had their place again. I even installed a climate control system down there, just for me. Never again would my joints ache from someone else's indifference. On the windowsill in the kitchen, I planted new roses. Not from my old home in Maplewood Heights, not from Susan's garden. A new variety, pale in color, subtle in scent, just like how I felt inside. Changed, softer, but blooming on my own terms. It wasn't long before I officially joined the Fairview Senior and Community Hub. I continued to teach the craft group weekly. Susan was still there, and her daughter Martha sometimes called on video with my great-grandchildren. My auntie-grandma title had stuck. Martha's kids had even mailed me cards, one taped with drawings of a white-haired woman holding garden shears, roses blooming behind her. Inside, it read, "Grandma Eleanor, this is you. You're our superhero. Grandma." I laughed softly and placed the card in the center of my coffee table. My life now felt like a mosaic. Old cracks, new pieces fitting back together. It didn't have to be perfect. This had to be mine. A few weeks after Thomas moved out, I received a strange package. No return address, just my name and Pebblebrook Lane. Inside was a small, worn wooden box. I knew it immediately. It held a bundle of old letters, the ones I'd written to Thomas more than a decade ago when he was in college. Every month, I'd written him a letter, not filled with advice, just reminders. It's getting cold. Wear something warm. Don't forget your dentist appointment. I'd always assumed he tossed them away, but he'd kept them, and now he'd sent them back. There were new letters too, handwritten, folded in between the yellowed ones. Leo asks me every night if Grandma's coming back. One note read, "Really, I know we pushed you away. I found your letters in the bottom of my toolbox when I was packing. I read them over and over. It hit me. Most of my life has been quietly held up by you. Now that the house is quiet, I think about how, when you were there, even if we didn't talk much, it felt like the light was always on." My eyes stung as I read them. It felt like a door I had stood by for years, cold, unanswered, had finally heard a knock. I didn't call, I didn't write back. I placed the letters back in the wooden box and tucked it into the living room drawer, next to my craft lesson plans and old photo albums. It didn't belong in the drawer for wounds, nor in the drawer for keepsakes. It was something else entirely, something still being redefined. Some relationships. They heal not by erasing the past, but by finding a new way to live with it, to grow from it. 2 weeks later, Thomas appeared at the community hub after my craft workshop, holding a paper bag. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, looking hesitant. Inside the bag was a wobbly collage frame Leo had made. In the center was a picture of Leo and me planting flowers in the garden at Maplewood Heights years ago. In the corner, in crooked marker letters, it read, "To Grandma Eleanor." "I miss the cookies," he said, his voice lower than I'd ever heard it. "I know I can't expect you to just let me back in, but I wanted you to know I'm trying, not just for you, for myself, and for Leo. I don't want him to end up like I did. Ungrateful, unaware." I gave him a small nod. "Then keep trying." We didn't hug, no tears, just 2 weathered trees resting a moment in the same quiet patch of shade. Before he left, he said, "If you're okay with it, I'd like to send you something from Leo every month. Drawings, maybe. I don't want him to lose the parts of you that matter." I agreed, not for him, but for the little boy who still drew with crayons. On the first week of every month now, I get a little envelope from Leo. Sometimes it holds a new drawing, other times, just a sticky note with a single line. "Grandma, I won a writing contest at school. I wrote about you." I didn't write back, not because I wasn't moved, but because I knew some relationships don't need to be hurried into healing. They grow back slowly, like roots under soil. This journey taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to keep giving, but to know when to step back and pour that love back into yourself. It's about finding your own true welcome. Back at my house on Pebblebrook Lane, I opened the living room drawer and took out the latest card Leo had sent. This time, I wrote back just one sentence on a small sticky note. "Thank you for remembering I like red velvet cake." I sealed the envelope, pressed down the stamp, and set it by the door for mailing. Outside, the sunlight was just right. The roses in the garden had opened a few more blooms. In the living room, a new photo had joined the frame on the mantel. It was of me and Susan, arms around each other, laughing at the craft studio last week. I was holding the fabric tote I'd just finished sewing. Her smile was all laugh and joy. Suddenly, I remembered something. I walked into the living room, pulled open a drawer, and found a blank sticky note. I wrote a short message, then pressed it gently to the back of the front door. "Eleanor's house. Welcome." It wasn't for anyone else. It was for me. A quiet, steady welcome. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt unseen or needed to reclaim your own space, I'd be honored if you'd consider sharing your thoughts below. And if you'd like to hear more stories about finding strength and rebuilding life, I hope you'll consider subscribing to join our community here.